being called a historic day as one country is now allowing itself to take your property and not even pay you for it. I'm going to share with you the story right now. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. This is Nomad Capitalist, with a channel and the company that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. And let me tell you, if you have property and if you have invested in a country where the headlines proclaim it's a historic day to allow the government to come in and take your property and not even pay you for it, you've got a problem. It's why we talk about diversifying your assets, having property, having bank accounts, having everything in different countries. Even if you're in crypto, how do you stay diversified? How do you make sure that the government can't come in and take everything you have? And I would say in this case, it includes having a second passport. The country is South Africa, and while we've talked about stories like in Berlin recently where large-scale corporate landlords may have their property purchased at fair market value, quote unquote, we'll see what that looks like. At least the government is going to pay you. We've seen similar stories in parts of Spain last year. But now we're seeing an entirely different kind of animal in South Africa. Land expropriation, says the headline from News 24. Historic day as ad hoc committee adopts Section 25 bill. Here's the bottom line. This committee in the government has adopted a bill to allow expropriation without compensation. The bill would allow what they call nil compensation, as in none, to be paid, and for some land to be placed in state custodianship. Now, the ANC, the political party there, voted in favor. Others were opposed. Here's the article. On Friday, this is early September, the ad hoc committee on Section 25 adopted a bill to amend the Constitution to allow expropriation without compensation, with only ANC members of Parliament voting in its favor. The bill will now be put before the National Assembly for adoption, where it is unlikely that the ANC would muster the required 2/3 majority to pass the bill. The bill would allow, where land and any improvements thereon are expropriated for purposes of land reform, the amount of compensation may be nil. It would also require national legislation to set up the circumstances where the amount of compensation is nil. Furthermore, the bill states that the land is the common heritage of all citizens and that the state must safeguard for future generations, and that the state must take reasonable legislative and other measures within its available resources to foster conditions which enable state custodianship of certain land in order for citizens to gain access to land on an equitable basis. This sounds like what you're hearing about in China now with shared prosperity. Now, what they're pointing out is it is a constitutional amendment. ANC is able to pass this through. They're not going to probably get the actual constitutional amendment. However, what do we always say? It's the camel's nose underneath the tent. Things are coming in. ANC and in South Africa, this has been the talk of the country for many years. In fact, I had this on the list. They've been talking about this 6 months ago, 12 months ago. This is, think about it, as close as it's ever gotten. But they're calling it a historic day as we adopt this Constitution 18th Amendment bill, which is the product of engagement by all political parties inside the committee and through bilaterals involving political principles and parties, which of course is not true. One political party wants to do it. One political party has been pushing, coming and taking your land. And this is something that they've been pushing forward for a long time. I won't get into the boring parts of it anymore, but you know, the trend. There's a couple trends we've been seeing in the last last couple of years, and the pandemic has accelerated many of these in countries where the politicians have been itching and scratching and clawing for a reason to take your stuff and take more of your own money. One of the trends has been the wealth tax. We've seen a lot of talk of wealth tax, and we follow this. We follow all the tax journals. We follow the newspapers. Continued talk of wealth tax. And by the way, in some of the countries like Canada, now the numbers seem to have come down that they're proposing, some of the politicians. Wealth tax. South Africa had proposed a wealth tax of as much as about 7%. Right now, interest rates are a little bit higher down there in South Africa, but basically after 14 or 15 years, you just be wiped out. And now they're talking about just coming in and, hey, if there's some property that we want and it's in the public interest, we can take it. And not even, unlike what they're doing in Berlin, where how dare you be a landlord at a large scale, unlike what they've been doing in countries like Spain, where how dare you own a property and not use it as much as or the way we want you to use it, we're going to take it. They'll pay you some value. listen, I grew up in the United States. I think that sometimes when the government comes in with eminent domain, are the numbers always fair? I had a friend who just actually went through an eminent domain process recently. He had no say in the matter. I think he got a kind of fair valuation in his mind, but he had no say. They're like, here's what we're going to pay you. And they kind of jerked him around the whole process, and they finally paid him out. And they were in control. So even when they're paying you, they're in control. They pay you what they want. What South Africa is talking about, what the party in charge is talking about is, let's just come and take it because we think it should be placed in our custodianship, because they've done such a great job running a once great country. And this is something to be concerned about, quite frankly. Now, South Africa is known for being a little squirrely in this regard. Beautiful place, by the way. I mean, go to Cape Town, beautiful place. Then you go to like the city center of Joburg, and you're like running for your life. So you've got some beautiful parts. I have great friends there. And so many people want to get out because they're worried about this. What do you do? If I'm South African, I would do the same thing I would tell anybody else to do. I talk to so many people who own property. They own multiple properties. They have the bulk of their assets in their own country. And they say, oh, things are falling apart. It's going down the tubes. Well, then you need to do something about it. You need to sell assets that you have while you can. Now, this is talking a lot about land, and it's always been an issue with farmland. I mean, look at what happened in Zimbabwe a number of years ago. One of the farmers had to go to Zambia where they got some land. And there were issues in Zambia. I mean, this part of the world, there just have been issues with this land distribution. Are they just coming and taking your house? Perhaps not. But land that can be a benefit to them, they'll determine, and they'll come in and take it, and they may not pay you for it. So do I want all my assets in that country? I may want none of my assets in that country, but I certainly want to be diversified, because what I see people doing, people come all the time and they say, Andrew, I'm worried about what's happening in my country, and I can't convince them to sell anything. You don't need 6 rental properties in a country where you're worried it's going in the tubes. So at least be diversified. And we've had a number of South Africans who've come to us, and it's like, okay, let's move some money out. Now, they have restrictions in South Africa, so you don't want to wait till the last minute, because you got to sometimes do it slowly, right? But you don't need new trusts in South Africa. You don't need new properties in South Africa. You need to be getting stuff out. And so this is the sign that it's time to go. And my fear is, much like the wealth tax, this is a theme that I'm seeing. This is the most egregious, but this is the theme that I'm seeing, where when you have the culture that allows AOC to go to, to the Met Gala and say tax the rich, and the rich are evil, they didn't earn it, let her take it all, while her buddy at the gala hasn't paid a lot of her income taxes or other taxes for years. But the culture says that's the right thing to do. Well, then you can do anything you want, because you have a common enemy. It's the guy who owns land. It's the guy who owns a farm. It's the guy who makes $1 million a year. It's the guy who owns a business. It's the guy who has employees. It's the guy who owns too many rentals. Once that guy or gal is the common enemy, well, why wouldn't you do anything to them? Why wouldn't it get worse? And it's the same thing that I see with the wealth tax. The wealth tax is, hey, one-time wealth tax. Well, of course, there's no such tax as a one-time tax. That's just the first one. Or, $20 million or more, you get a wealth tax. Then you turn and you look a little bit, and then it goes to $10 million. And I just kind of think this is a trend that they could look at more and more. We've mentioned over the last year or so numerous countries that are talking about this. This is the most egregious. It's a bad trend, and in cultures where someone who owns property is the enemy, I think this is the kind of slope that you're going to go down. This is why you want diversification. If you come to me and say, hey, Andrew, something happened in Cambodia, okay, I lost 1% of my net worth. I don't go in with that hoping to be the case, and I happen to think that countries like Cambodia, I was in Nicaragua a number of years ago, these kind of countries, people say that like the government's going to come and take your stuff the way they might have used to. I think that there's been a learning cycle there, which countries in the West and perhaps South Africa have forgotten or simply don't care about. The politicians perhaps are too dumb to know. They're in the phase where everything's been great. They're the legacy brand. They figure we can do anything and get away with it because we're a great democracy. I don't think that the countries that I'm talking about, the emerging countries that have just escaped chaos not so long ago, think that there's some great democracy. They're like, we're in rebuilding mode. These other countries where they think they're on top of the world, all the socialists in the U.S. who say, well, socialism failed in so many other places, but don't worry, we'll do it better here. It's because they think they're invincible. And this is the kind of stuff politicians who think they're invincible do. So I want to be diversified, especially if I'm in South Africa, but I think you'll see more Western countries imposing restrictions like this. I'd like to have some assets here, some assets here, some assets here. I'd like to be diversified, and that way you'll make sure you can always go where you're treated best. Don't stop now. We've got well over 1,000 more videos here on YouTube for you to watch and learn how to go where you're treated best. And if you want to work with Nomad Capitalist personally, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, learn about our unique, tried and true process, garnered over years of experience, and learn how you can become our client.